And so you're becoming an officer in the Massachusetts Medical Society is really part of a long involvement with the organization. When did you first become involved with the Massachusetts Medical Society?
Well, when we first came to Worcester in 1977, I went into practice. And the last thing on my agenda was to join organized medicine. And so I wasn't a member of anything. I didn't belong to AMA, I didn't belong to the Academy of Pediatrics, I didn't belong to my district, I didn't belong to MassMed. And then my husband actually got me involved with this. And he took me to a Worcester District Medical Society meeting, and he said, I think you'd like to come because our speaker is going to be the first woman president of the Mass Medical Society, and that was Barbara Rocket. So I went, and I was really impressed, and I thought, well, maybe I should join. Maybe I should join. So I did join then. I think that was 1988,
Yeah, the
maybe?
late 80s, yep.
And then I became involved in it because I thought, boy, this is helpful to me professionally. The collegiality is the other part of it that I really liked.
Right.
And sitting at the table either in the district, I didn't get that involved with the State Medical Society until I was asked to sit on the committee on membership. So I became a member of that committee, became chair of that, and then it really took off from there. So this would be after 1988.
Yeah, and so I think you point out a progression that is quite common in that if we look among professionals in general, they're completing their education up until their early 30s. They're building their skill set in their profession during their 30s and early 40s. They're focusing on their families during their 30s and 40s, and then in their 50s and 60s they become more involved with the general community.
Yes.
And so that progression is quite common, and you outline that very nicely. So how has the society changed over your years?
I think from the time I was president and looking at it now and watching it grow, certainly they've grown in membership, and I think that says a lot in this day and age, a lot about the worth of being in this medical society. They have really been on top of many issues. They are so well respected at the State House, and it's not just on one or two issues. And it's really heartwarming to see your engagement with legislators and also with the media, with a lot of other health organizations. So we met with, as you know, we meet with the insurers. It was interesting when I became president. At the time, I sat on the board of a health plan, and I told the board and the CEO and the board chair that I needed to quit the board because it was a terrible conflict of interest for me to be president of the medical society and sit on a payer board. And the CEO said, well, I don't understand that. I'd love to have somebody on my board that's president of the medical society. And I said, I think it's a conflict. So I went off. And the day after I finished my presidency, they called and said, well, you're back.
That's nice.
So it was I think just the wealth of opportunity that you have. I look at what all the stuff that's going on now, especially with opioids, all the things that are going on with the education in opioid, just looking at how we are leading the way in that. I think that's more that I saw when I was president. We were on the forefront, but we weren't as much a leader as they are now.
And I think what you're also painting a picture of is the fact that the medical society has in many ways overcome the stereotype of organized medicine as a self-interested guild of sorts.
Yes.
And has basically represented itself as an objective, intelligent advocate for good health care.
Yes, yes.
And has been successful at doing that.
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely been what was interesting to me was actually making friends with the people at the Massachusetts Association of Health Plans, at MAP, looking at the Mass Bar Association that we used to work with. Who'd have thunk that we
Yeah.
would have done that?
Right.
So I think you're right, we really did not go up there and say, we need to get more money, we need to make more money. That is a
Yeah.
total stop for
Yeah.
anybody that wants to talk to you.
Right.
So that's not what the issues are. It's always about our patients. It's
Right.
always about the health care of the state.
Right. And you bring your perspective as a pediatrician, and you bring your perspective as a person in small private practice.
Yes.
How did you feel that informed your contributions as an officer?
I think it informed it a lot because I saw myself as a champion of the small independent practices, of the solo practitioners, of their absolute value, especially in rural areas, and how crucial they are, and that they stay in business. And I think that my advocating for them didn't go unnoticed, especially by the small practices. But I think they're still alive, unfortunately. They're definitely merging and that sort of thing. But a lot of them are still practicing as a small practice, even though they're part of a larger organization.
Right.
So it's still there.
Right.
But financially, that's how they have to stay alive.
Right. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about your practice. You started in 1977
I did.
in Worcester. And during that time, how did your practice evolve?
So I initially became, in a way, employed, but not really. I joined another pediatrician who was looking for a partner. And he had just purchased, nobody buys practices anymore, he had just purchased a practice in Holden, a pediatric practice, a very large pediatric practice, and he had already been recruited a couple of years before that by Clinton Hospital to help one pediatrician that was up in Clinton. So I spent my time going between Clinton and Holden. And it was a great experience. And so it was the two of us. We were in a call group, but it wasn't a very big call group. And so it was a fair amount of, when I look back on it, I just did it because you did it. And at that point, I didn't have any kids yet. So it wasn't such a big deal then. But it was, Clinton was a small town, and everybody knew everybody. And you go into the waiting room, and they all were neighbors or whatever, and they'd say, "Hey, do you need a ride home?" "Yeah, I'll wait, I'll take you." It was great.
Yeah.
And they knew my car. So when they would see me coming through town, and I'd pass the Victory Market, which is, I think, still there, past the Victory Market, somebody would see my car and call the office and say, "Hey, Doc's on her way." Now, who does that anymore? So, but that's neither here nor there. But it was a great experience.
Yes.
So then, one of the pediatricians in Worcester became ill and needed to not practice for a while, but he wanted to keep his practice going. So he had asked my husband, who then was chief of pediatrics at Worcester City Hospital, if he could just come maybe an afternoon a week to keep the practice going. And this was Peter Karpowicz's practice. We ended up purchasing that practice, and then the two of us worked together there for a short period of time. And then Bob went on a different path, and I stayed. And so I was at Chandler Pediatrics for until 2011. So a long time.
Right. And during that time, so you were initially practicing with your husband, and then over the next segment of time, you brought in a partner or two?
Yes. I practiced solo for a while, but I was in a call group, and this was a little bigger call group now. And so that worked out fairly well. My office was the first floor of an old house on Chandler Street, which is hence the name Chandler Pediatrics. I had a nurse, and that was it.
Okay.
So that was the office. I remember I had a sterilizer, so I could sterilize instruments and all that sort of stuff. It sounds ancient now. And then we used to always take, when they started a program at UMass where the pediatric residents did their outpatient training out in the community in offices. So our practice volunteered, and we used to have a resident who came every week for 3 years, and we got to really know them. In the meantime, I went into partnership with Sheila Callahan Butler, and she and I were partners, and then we hired the resident that trained with me, and that was Catherine Reardon.
Yes.
So it was Catherine, Sheila, and I, and then Sheila decided she really did like being by herself, so she went back to solo practice. And Catherine is still at Chandler Pediatrics, still running it. It's still a 3-person practice, and still going strong.
That's great. And during those days, what was a day like?
Well, we did newborn rounds, we did hospital rounds, which isn't being done anymore by the majority of physicians that are in practice. But we would start, if it was, we each took rounds for a week, and if it was my week to be on rounds, I would get up and go to wherever there was a newborn, which in those days could have been St. Vincent, Hanneman, City didn't have newborn, but it did have inpatient pediatrics and UMass. So I could potentially go to 4 hospitals in the morning before I started. Most of the time you were at either St. Vincent and or Memorial to see newborns.
Right.
And then you go, what a great way to start the day, see newborns. And then you went to the office and started office hours. We would book 15-minute appointments, and sometimes you could get a little time out of one, and other times you couldn't.
Sure.
We'd see about probably anywhere from 25 to 30 kids a day, each of us. And then you were also, I didn't have anybody helping me with phone calls, so in between you were making phone calls and everything. We've changed a lot, made my life a lot easier. And then when you were done, and that was usually about 6 or 7 o'clock. And in the meantime, I had a service that we put the phones on, our answering service, at about 5, but then you had to keep checking to see who was calling in and needed a call back. And then you went home. And then the phone rang all night long.
Okay. All right. And in the midst of all of this, you're having children?
Yes. We had 2 boys in 78 and 80, yes. So I remember my first maternity leave was 3 weeks. And I went back to work and then the next one, I was actually working at St. Vincent and practicing, and I was told that I had 8 weeks for maternity leave. And I said, I don't need 8 weeks. That's crazy. And after about 3 weeks, I said, can I come back? And maybe
let me out of here.
Yeah, geez. So, and I had a wonderful, and the key to all of this was a wonderful person that came to the house and took care of my children.
Sure.
That was the best.